Okay, okay. Everybody has heard the accusations. Everybody's been throwing out, where has the socialist shelf been? What have you been doing? Lenore, we're all about transparency here on the pod. Do you want to tell the good shelfers, do we want to come clean and say what we've been doing this last couple months?
Yes, of course. We've fielded before the accusation of selling out to the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. 2 years into doing the podcast, 1 year or 2 year, the time blurs. But after a
One
while
and a
of doing the
half. Split the
one and a
split the
half,
difference. Yeah.
yeah, we sell out to the organization we've been a part of for even longer than that. Imagine that. No, no, we've actually sold out to. We are recording, of course, in July 2025. Kamala Harris is the president, and we have taken a small loan to an underprivileged podcast, running it for 2.5 years at this point, and now we can go to college for free on that gravy train. So thank you, Officer Harris, Officer President Harris, as your title now is, top cop. May you reign for supreme forever. No, no, folks, this is 2024, and we are finally back after our ballot petitioning hiatus. That's been consuming a lot of our time. I've gotten into a new job and I've been trying to figure out that schedule. Um, but I can say with a degree of certainty that yeah, thanks to our contributions, thanks to especially Jacob's contributions, I know you've been running ragged. Um, there's going to be a socialist on the ballot here in Georgia. And
Yes, very
that's
exciting.
involved talking to thousands of people, literally thousands of conversations with people who have signed their name to this and who want to see something different. So, we'll see you in November, and we'll see you before and after November, because all that stuff that takes place outside of the election season is politics as well.
No, the only thing that's politics is voting every 4 years, Lenore, and to even imply otherwise. But we have, I think before we hit the music, before you hit that music that you haven't heard in so long, I do have something pretty cool. We have we're bringing on sort of what are we using? The term we use. Ryan, do you want to be a producer? Are you our producer now?
Hell yeah, I'll be a producer.
Folks, you're hearing a third voice on the pod. This is not a guest. This is Ryan, who we are bringing on as a, producer slash editor slash, letting us know what we need to do. We don't want to become an echo chamber here. And also, your emails, they're nice, but sometimes they don't make a lot of sense. No offense, but I've just gotten several 3 a.m. emails about Bill Clinton that I didn't quite understand. So, getting that sound advice from Ryan here. So Ryan, welcome. He is gonna sort of be quietly lurking in the darkness on this episode and future episodes. So, you can kind of imagine a third face, a third, if or you imagine a third bust, if you will. But and we'll try and have you as a guest at some point. That would also be solid. But Ryan, welcome to the Socialist Shelf.
Well, a guest, is on and then they're off. There's a limit to their time here. You're not a guest, you are a prisoner.
Oh yeah, that's true. But yes.
Well, couldn't have picked a nicer dungeon for you all to entomb me in. Very happy to be here. I heard it's a whole lot of work, writing, producing, and editing a podcast all by yourself. So glad I can take some of that load off. Glad we're finally out of petitioning season. Can get back into reading good books and organizing ourselves.
Let's do it. Hit the music.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome back to the Socialist Shelf, the podcast about reading good books and organizing yourself. We are back with another Tolkien episode. I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't listened to our Hobbit episode, we're not giving you the author bio. We gave you an author bio and a half with that Tolkien episode. So if you might need to pause, go back, at least listening to the beginning of our Hobbit episode, because you're really going to know that you're really going to want to know that context about our friend John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, because quite a character, I'd say.
Yeah, we could have done the whole episode just about him, and indeed nearly did.
Yeah, I would say that was at least a solid half. So,
So can I tell you, we of course we read this book a while ago, and then petitioning season kicked off for, Claudia and Karina, Claudia de la Cruz, Karina Garcia. Um,
name drop.
yeah, yes, and the I tell you what, I read it back then, and then I reread it, and I almost didn't finish reading it the second time around. Do you know why, Jacob?
Why?
Because it's the Steam summer sale. And Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor was on sale for like 350, so I was up late playing that shit the other night.
Shadow of Mordor, which is famously loved by Tolkien heads for how canonical it is. No, that's the
Well,
game.
for telling us all about where exactly the Eye of Sauron came from. Who knew he was wrestling Celebrimbor for decades?
The thing about Shadow of Mordor is I'm okay enough with how it stretches the canon. When we get into Shadow of War, it's too far. It's a bridge too far. I don't know if you've played Shadow of War, but it shatters. Spoiler alert, Isildur, it was one of the Nazgul, is insane. That's insane. I'm sorry. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about The Lord of the Rings, first book, Fellowship of the Ring.
Specifically, the adaptation from the Soviet Union in the late 80s. We're going to be talking extensively about that. Buckle in for our 5-hour episode about the theatrical production that was never meant to be brought to the screen.
Um, you know, have you ever actually watched that? Because it is remarkable.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's something else.
I
But
tell you what, the like disco music or whatever that underscores every scene with the Nazgul in it is actually a bop.
there you go. Well, this book was released 29th of July in 1954. The context was given in the last episode, but just grounding you in that, worth noting, this book was written actually quite a bit earlier. And World War II, there challenges coming out of that, economic crises, difficult time to publish a book. But 1954 and 1955, these three books came out back to back to back because Tolkien actually wanted it published as one large volume, which they're pretty thick volumes as they are. So
Well, and Jacob, what you've been told about publishing enormous fantasy, well, not fantasy debuts, but like you got to have a few under your belt before you get to that point.
it's true. So right off the bat, we launch into something that Tolkien didn't want to be a prologue, that thankfully is a prologue, which is concerning hobbits. And and depending on the version you have of this book, sometimes if you get the one with appendices, you go through the entire, which like the one I read when I was in 7th grade, first reading this book, you go through the entire lineage of Bilbo and Frodo Baggins through characters that do not matter at all. Just elaborate. And I remember when I first read this as a kid, I thought I was going to hate this book because I was like, this feels like reading like those parts in the Bible, like this guy begat this guy, begat this guy.
Mohab went unto Mohib, Mohib went unto Mohab.
And so on, leading up to Bilbo Baggins. But turns out in this case, the prose does get a little easier because you have a long expected party as chapter 1. And I do love that because what's the first chapter of The Hobbit? An unexpected party. It's unintentional, or not unintentionally, it's intentionally rhyming from the very beginning here.
Yeah, the callbacks are they come fast and they come hard. And
For the
in
real
the
heads.
yeah, and in certain cases it's I mean, if I were reading this much younger, like if I had read The Hobbit all the way through as a child, and if I were reading this, say, as like a slightly older child or a young adult, younger adult, then I mean, it would take me by surprise. Like, because there's some stuff in here that legit feels like a maturation of what he brought us in The Hobbit.
No doubt. In fact, he kind of had this idea that this was going to be a kid's book going into it, and he gave up on that during his first draft because he was just like, there's stuff I want to include in here that I just can't. And Fellowship doesn't quite get as dark as this series gets. Return of the King by far has the darkest moments, including but not limited to deformed heads being launched on catapults, and mutilation of corpses, among other things. Never gets like full, Game of Thrones level anything. Of course, Tolkien is still, a good Catholic boy, but it certainly does take a step further into darkness as this world has taken a step into darkness. But the first chapter, not dark at all. It opens up saying, when Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 111st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. And it goes on, but right at the beginning, it's like wink, wink. If you've read The Hobbit, you know this guy. It's your favorite guy, or you're back on board. Because remember, Tolkien was rejected from publishing the Silmarillion right after The Hobbit because they're like, nobody knows who that guy is. Give us Bilbo. We love that guy. So right off the gate, Tolkien is giving the people what they want. Fan favorite Bilbo Baggins back at it for, a few pages until he literally disappears.
And it hits that, again, we're going to be praising George Orwell very seldom on this podcast, but it hits that, it's this date and the clock is striking 13 note, like his 111st birthday
Mhm.
says, it tells you a little bit about the benign quirkiness of our Hobbit people.
And it also is the first bit of world building here, I think, in the sense of showing you where you are in the world. Tolkien is interesting because people use Tolkien as the example of the fantasy author who just talks at you and tells you his lore. And that is 100% true until it's not.
Hmm.
Because he'll have these moments that are actually quite clever of where he sneaks in, by the way, here's where you are chronologically, or like, by the way, here's the general vibe of this place. Um, he chooses not to always do that. It's a very intentional thing, but I do think it's interesting that there is a reputation around Tolkien for having zero nuance or subtlety, but he actually does have moments of subtlety when he chooses to. It's just the fact that he just realizes with these hobbits that these hobbits don't know anything about Middle Earth beyond the Shire. So I can have characters just lecture at them, tell them about the world, and then I can tell the reader about the world in the same way. But when you're within the Shire, he doesn't quite get to do that same level of just Elrond sitting you down, putting a hand on your shoulder, and talking at you for 2 hours. I'm not kidding. 2 hours is how long the audiobook chapter of the Council of Elrond is.
Yes, yes, and we'll get to the Council of Elrond, of course, but I do appreciate, as we were talking about earlier, Jacob, I do appreciate how all the memes about Lord of the Rings that stem from, not reading it, just kind of culturally osmosising it, like, oh, why don't the Eagles just take you to Mordor? Because Sauron would see them coming, and because it's not their concern. Oh, why don't they do X, Y, and Z? Because A, B, and C. Like the Council lays it all out. The
No,
Council
yeah,
lays it all out.
it's just that, you have to read the chapter of the Council of Elrond, and not everybody's built to do that, but we'll get to it. Um, I'll tell you who is built to do it. Andy Serkis, who did the audiobook for Lord of the Rings, and it's quite good.
Really?
And I'm not kidding, 2 hour long chapter, Council of Elrond. So, some stereotypes do hit. Um,
For
but
reference,
you
like
know,
I've been listening to the Gotrek and Felix audiobooks from Warhammer Fantasy, and like a single one of those runs like 9.5, 10 hours. Like they come at you fast.
admittedly, Andy Serkis does really ham up the performances with his like pauses and his long whatever, but he's Andy Serkis. He's great at it.
Well, I
He,
mean, for a Tolkien thing, right? For a fantasy author from a guy who would lecture on Beowulf, right? You have to lean into the oral tradition there, right? You have to ham it up, and perform it because in a sense, it is a story that benefits from that.
have you ever heard the recordings of Tolkien reading his own work?
There is one that I know of, but no, I hadn't.
It's good. I mean, he's not by any means a performer. He never claims to be, but you can tell he does that exact tone. He reads very slowly and deliberately when he's reading prose, and when he reads quotations, he does go back to a more normal, casual speed. So, like, he also has the idea of this could be a reading.
Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island while Bilbo was sitting on the brink, altogether flummoxed and at the end of his way in his wits. Suddenly up came Gollum, and whispered and hissed, "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At least a tasty morsel it'll make us Gollum." And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That is how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious.
This is a carryover from the first book that is meant to be a bedtime story style book. The Silmarillion and Lord of the Rings, less bedtime story, more guys standing in the middle of the village, giving a speech, or a lore master or a priest or someone reciting. A lore master for sure with the Silmarillion, but
How's
that's its own thing.
how's Tolkien's singing voice? Because there's a lot of
Um,
songs in this.
I don't think I've ever heard a recording of him singing, so I don't know. I
There
couldn't tell you.
is, I remember reading about one in an annotated Hobbit a while back, and that song that appears in this book, Troll sat alone on a seat of stone and munched and mumbled a barrel bone, that was written apparently to the tune of a song called The Fox Went Out, and
Mhm.
somewhere extant, I think there is a recording of Tolkien singing that, but I haven't listened to it.
A troll sat alone on his seat of stone, and munched and mumbled a bare old bone. For many a year he'd gnawed it near, for meat was hard to come by, some by, gum by. In a cave in the hills he dwelt alone, and meat was hard to come by. Up came John with his big boots on, says he to the troll, "Pray what is yon? For it looks like the shin of an Uncle Jim, as should be a loin in graveyard, caveyard, paveyard. This many a year has Jim been gone, and I thought he were lying in graveyard." "My lad," said Troll, "this bone I stole, but what be bones that lie in a hole?"
Nevertheless, there's an unexpected party happening, and I'm going to say, or a long expected party happening, rather. And, saying right off the bat, listener probably knows the story of Lord of the Rings. This is not one of the more obscure books we've done. So I won't belabor, the individual points too long. Bilbo having a party to see himself off, even though they don't know it, causes himself to vanish with the Ring of Power and go away, and he gives up the Ring of Power to his nephew, our main character, Frodo Baggins.
Frodo, son of
Right there.
Drogo.
Frodo, son of Drogo. That being Khal Drogo.
Yeah.
That would change things dramatically.
Yeah, as the as the hobbits, the prologue, like it talks about like the three kind of lineages of hobbits that settled the Shire a while back when the land was wilder. So, at some point the Dothraki came through there.
Mm-hmm. Bull Roar was in fact a Dothraki.
He could
He
ride a
took
horse.
he took care of the wereworms of the last desert.
Oh man, we never see those again, do we?
That's we have a whole Dune episode. It's like 2.5 hours long.
Middle Earth, Shadow of Worm.
She's Shadow on. No, that's not anything.
Where's Daddy Two Foot? Because so the gaffer, right, Samwise's father, right? He has a next door neighbor right on this page, and no wonder they're queer. Put in Daddy Two Foot, the gaffer's next door neighbor. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River, he's talking about Frodo and Bilbo. And right again, the Old Forest. That's a dark, bad place if half the tales be true. So, I mean, you get a sense throughout the first chapter, throughout the our time in the Shire, of the charming sort of parochiality of the hobbits. They don't really take up any business with the outside for the most part. They're as a rule generally suspicious of the outside world, and even of people who live like on the edges of their own territory, right? So there's that, but also where the fuck is Daddy Two Foot for the rest of the series?
I think he makes a reappearance in the last book incredibly briefly and like a list of names, but don't quote me on it.
Okay.
But yeah, Daddy 2 foot, which is interesting. You'd think it would be more notable if it was like 1 foot, or
Every every
3 foot.
every every so often one of these names just jumps out at me, and it's because I'm totally brain poisoned. So, you'll forgive my laughter here and there.
Sure. I mean, Tolkien definitely found it amusing to call a character something 2 foot. That would be, of course, what he found to be funny. Or Tolkien would find it funny. Like there's the bit where there's the guy who's called the Proudfoots. He's got his feet on the table and says proud feet. And that's the joke. Because again, linguist humor. Tolkien
Hmm.
always firing off with those little linguist jokes. I'm sure there's plenty in here that I've even, missed because I'm not on that very close linguist grind.
Well,
But
and I tell you what, like not to keep
yeah, yeah,
belaboring
yeah.
the hobbits here, but you can really read accents into these. Like you don't even have
Hmm.
to have seen the film and know what how Sean Astin portrays Sam, for example. But like with the slang that they use, drowned it instead of drowned, like you can really read an accent into these voices without it necessarily having to be transcribed.
When I read these books to aloud to my little sister, I did like a thick Southern twang for Sam because I thought that would be a fun Sam character. You could really see it,
You can't
drowned it.
carry the burden, but I can carry you.
Yeah, basically. That was the go on it.
Hell
But
yeah.
we've got the main hobbits to know. We've got Sam, who is Frodo's sort of servant, gardener. He's the help around Bag End, he gets hired to really his dad was hired before him by Bilbo, and now he does the work, but he's the gardener. That's and helps out. And then you've got Pippin and Merry, who are these two younger hobbits. They're young, they're in their 30s, which hobbits living to be a little older, that's still a pretty youthful age, the late 20s, early 30s. They call that the tweens in Hobbit years. Um, and they're just two more guys who are kind of mischievous, but kind, and they hang around, and they don't really develop, I think, a particular lot of character beyond just being kind of cut ups with a heart of gold until later in the series.
Even in the film,
Um,
I have trouble telling them apart.
yeah, they have their distinct little quirks to them, but they're definitely supposed to be just two guys who are of sort of the same feather. Um, and in this, their quirkiness is exposed in something that's cut from the movies because it's just kind of arbitrary. But they have a conspiracy, which is to go with Frodo on his journey. His journey being to take the ring to Rivendell because turns out not safe to keep the ring in the Shire. And I feel almost silly describing it because like I know everybody here is going to be like, yeah, I know, I've seen the movie. You probably read the book, but certainly seen the movie. But bears repeating. What I find interesting in this is they're in the Shire for like 150 pages before they get anywhere. And how did you feel about that, Lenore?
I mean, it's certainly for somebody who's used to the pacing of the film, it's certainly kind of a swing, but I think it gives us a little more catharsis in terms of leaving the Shire,
Hmm.
because the there's this whole sequence to it. First, Frodo has to set up like he's you know, they know that the Nine are abroad, right? They know that the Nazgul are in the Shire. They're looking for somebody named Baggins, right?
Hmm.
Because Gollum at this point has been captured and tortured by Sauron until he slipped that name, right? And so Frodo has to go through this whole rigmarole of buying a new property on the uttermost edge of the Shire, selling Bag End to his shitty relatives, and then moving to Crick Hollow as the new house, right? And so his flight out of the Shire is done under the cover of moving, right? And so his friends are helping him move. There's a guy, Fatty Bulger, who helps him, who's like a fifth hobbit that doesn't make it into the movie. And like he passes through Farmer Maggot's farm at one point. Of course, we remember them being chased through the fields. That's where we meet Merry and Pippin in the movie, right? And there's a whole extended sequence of them talking to Farmer Maggot and kind of reminiscing about how Frodo got caught stealing mushrooms, right? And what does Farmer Maggot do, right? He sends Frodo on his way with picnic basket packed full of mushrooms, right? Later on, Frodo is talking to and I may find it, I may not, here in the text. But Frodo's talking to Merry and Pippin, and they're like, "Look, we've been listening in on you. We know that there's something crazy about this ring that you can't do alone. So we're gonna come with you, like it or not, because that's what friends do." So there is more of a sense, I think, of putting to bed somewhere that you've been your whole life that you may never return to again, and it coming back and saying, "Hey, you may never forget this place, and this place has not forgotten you either."
Mhm.
And I appreciate that.
But trouble has come into the Shire in the form of the Black Riders. And I'd say the movie depicts this fairly faithfully. You just got this dark figure who has come into the Shire, who's looking around, who's trying to sort of portray himself as a man, but just can't quite get away with it. The only thing that I'll say that's a big change that I think find to be funny is when he talks to Farmer Maggot and he asks, "Where have you come from?" In the book, the Black Rider points and says, "Yonder," and that kills me imagining the Black Rider saying "yonder." It's just-
which is scary enough for people who are like, "Oh, Mr. Baggins has gone away. I've never been so far to Buckleberry myself. They're queer folks in Buckland," and it's like, dog, it's the next province over.
Right, exactly. But here's the thing. Ends up there is just straight up a haunted forest on the border. So the hobbits aren't entirely wrong. The entire hobbitish fear of like we're gonna go beyond the Shire and we're gonna get eaten immediately. The thing is they go beyond the Shire and they almost get eaten immediately.
This
So
is
like
true.
there's something to that. And I think we said it last time, but as political as Tolkien often gets, really comes down to just him being like the Shire is how people ought to be. They ought to be nice to each other. They ought to, focus on their work, get their thing done, and be charitable fellows who like to eat and like good music and they like green grass and they don't go poking into each other's business.
Yeah, the most impressive building that we hear about is, okay, like there's the Matham House and like their capital, like Michael Delving or whatever. Mitchell Delving? How do you pronounce that?
I think it's Michael Delving, but I don't know.
Michael Delving? Yeah, I tend to agree. There's the Matham House, of course, where like there's like cool, museum shit there and whatnot. But like the most impressive building that we hear about from the Shire is this temporary pavilion that's set up for Bilbo's birthday, right? And
Mhm.
it's mentioned that, the field that he's having his birthday party in, right? The pavilion is so big that the tree that's standing in the field is right inside it. And like that intrigues me, right? To a race of people as, parochial as the hobbits and as, chill. They don't do skyscraper building, right? Trees are always their superiors, mountains are always their superiors, and their idea of a monument is A, temporary, and B, one that can hold a tree for, however long the party is, Like, I mean, Victor Hugo talks in Hunchback about how architecture is the medium for expressing ideas among an illiterate population. I mean, Hobbit architecture is functional. It's not really meant to stand the test of time because, to hobbits, there isn't really a test of time. Things go on existing much as they always have and always will.
Right. Um, I also think it's notable, you have this among the hobbits, a sort of fear of the outside. It's not expressed in the sense of like, oh, we hobbits, we lock our gates. Like, it's that people come through, people come in and out and the other. There's a band of elves they run into, but the hobbits are scared of the wider world. But here's the interesting thing. When you go beyond the Shire, they encounter a lot of peril. But here's what's notable. The peril basically never stems from other people. Really? If you think about it, the first thing they encounter, the old forest and the terror of this wild nature. The next thing they encounter is literal, zombies, skeletons. Okay, that's a danger, but that's not people. They go further, they encounter, wraiths that are hunting them. No matter how far they go, they encounter now and again some like bad humans who work with Sauron. But
Hmm.
Mary chucks an apple at one of their heads at one point. Um, but it's not a matter of it's why we come back to this weird thing with Tolkien, who has these very, Western conceptions and biases, but it's not quite the same wave. It's like, oh, and there's all these invaders ready to get into the Shire,
There
and
is
they're ready to,
one there
you
is
know,
one like squint-eyed southerner, the text calls him, that's with Bill Ferny. That's kind of like cringe, but I mean,
Oh yeah, no doubt that there's some cringe to point out here. Certainly.
but I mean, certainly it's not on it's not on like it's not on display as like some other stuff we've gotten into.
It's just a fascinating dynamic that it can be sort of protective of the home, and it can be like, this is our spot and we want to stick here, and that's good and that's
Mhm.
beautiful, and preserve it without necessarily being afraid of the neighbor, but there is still like a terror beyond the border. And it's just a disembodied, or when it's embodied, is embodied very specifically by a malice that is beyond human reckoning. It is Sauron, or it is, in the case of the Barrow Wights, the remnants of an ancient
Yes.
evil. But
Yeah.
there are also ancient weird goods you can run into. Like if, say, you're wandering in a forest and the forest starts to close in around you, and your friends gets roots grown up all over them, a guy can just show up and start singing, and everything could be fine.
Yes, Tom Bombadil, who speaks constantly. I checked this. Like he speaks constantly in this really lyrical, bouncy kind of heptameter that he almost never breaks.
Now and again, he does like a quick thing, but it's for instance, the two hobbits get caught in the tree. The tree literally starts growing around them. And then Frodo just starts yelling, "Help, help, help." And then it says, suddenly he stopped. There was an answer, or so he thought, but it seemed to come from behind him, away down the path further back in the forest. He turned around and listened, and soon there could be no doubt. Someone was singing a song. A deep, glad voice was singing carelessly and happily, but it was singing nonsense. Hey dole, merry dole, ring a dong dillo, ring a dong, hop along, fa la la the willow. Tom bomb, jolly Tom, Tom bombadillo. To be clear, this is possibly the most powerful character in Middle Earth, and this is how he's introduced. And he goes on to sing, "Hey dole, merry dole, light under the weather wind, feathered starling, down under the hill, shining in the sunlight," on and on. Tom Bombadil, he's a merry fellow, bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. He's just this guy who just shows up, um, and will be debated endlessly in forums till probably the sun blows up.
And there's the one let me see, the one part where he breaks meter. First of all, it's really interesting the way he's treated in other adaptations, like in board games and video games and card games, because sometimes like Tom Bombadil will just be straight up invincible and can't be harmed. But there's a really funny clip from I believe Battle for Middle Earth 2 where he gets his ass beat by a Balrog and his death line is like, "Oh, the song is over." But there is a point I see, and maybe I'm miscounting here, but he seems to break meter when he's talking about his nature. Let's see. So of course, Jacob gave us a sense of his meter. He says things like, I've got things to do, my making and my singing, my talking and my walking and my watching of the country. Tom can't be always near to open doors and willow cracks. Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry is waiting. Like you can hear the like jaunt in his voice, like the stress and unstressed syllables. But when he's talking about exactly what he is, don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. Tell me, who are you alone, yourself, and nameless? So, okay, meter, but you are young and I am old. Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people and saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves and the Barrow-wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already, before the seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside. You have that, and you also have Goldberry at when Frodo straight up asks her what.
Goldberry being Tom's wife, by the way.
Yes, he's married to this like canonically thick nymph, and she goes and Frodo's like, okay, who is he? And she says, he is.
Hmm.
Not just you could read it as like just like trolling, like, oh, who's Tom? That's Tom. But also there you can read it as like Tom is God. Tom is the great I am of this universe, right? The great he is.
Okay, but I'm gonna say right now that he's not. Um, the thing about Tom Bombadil And this is obviously open to interpretation. But the thing about Tom Bombadil, and to be clear, just for the rest of his arc, he's with them for a little bit. He sends them on their way. They have a brief moment where he plays with the ring, is completely untempted by it. They leaving get in danger once more from barrow wights, which he mentioned, skeleton creatures. He saves them again. They let him loose, and then he doesn't show back up. The thing about Tom Bombadil, and it's a weird conversation, is when you think about how Tolkien observes God and his relationship to God, big G, God, is unlike, his compatriot C.S. Lewis. He is not, he is very, very far from this Protestantism that wants to turn God into a figure, who wants to turn Jesus into a lion. Tolkien wants to abstract the divine as much as possible. When he talks about God, when he makes a God of Middle Earth, God has multiple names. God is indescribable. The origin of God is one of the only things that doesn't get described in the mythos, even though he likes to describe things meticulously. The ultimate goal of God is told to be transcendent. It's on and on. There is a very particular God named Eru Iluvatar that exists beyond being, beyond Ea, the realm of the earth. What Tom Bombadil is, in my opinion, is and this is based on the fact that we do know the origin of Tom Bombadil, the name, and it's a character he made up telling his kids bedtime stories. It's just a little guy, and they had a little stuffed animal that they named Tom Bombadil that they would play with. I think he literally just said, "Hey kids, remember how I wrote The Hobbit for you? Remember your stuffed animal, Tom Bombadil? Yeah, he just exists in this world and he's the most powerful guy." I think that's all there is to it. And I know that sounds reductive and simple, but given that The Hobbit is entirely just a book that is a thing to his kids, and given that some of his short stories are things just to his kids, and we know Tom Bombadil is a name made up by his kids, I don't think he has a greater lore explanation. I think he is just a toy that got dropped fully formed into this universe, and to try to explain it starts to show the cracks of Tolkien's legendarium, which is why everyone is just like, he's always been here and he's not worried about it, and you shouldn't worry about it either. And that shatters the wanting to perfect the world brains that of people that can 99.99% of the time do that in Tolkien, because Tolkien can be broken down to a molecular science most of the time. And this is that one crack in the world that I think Tolkien very intentionally allows to show. And the same way it shows in The Hobbit, because it's a thing with his kids, I think it's the exact same thing here. And that is my spiel on Tom Bombadil. And there have been people on the internet who have sent me basically death threats over this opinion, but I hold way back in the day, back when I played Lord of the Rings online, but I hold it still and I will hold it forever. And that is the Jacob take on the matter.
Well, Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry is indeed waiting.
Yes, and we just talked a long time about this guy in chapter 5. But if you want to talk about things that aren't in the movie, this thing is not. Of course, it's not in the movie. How the fuck would you do this in a movie?
He's going to be in season 2 of Rings of Power.
Yeah, have you seen the pictures? His boots aren't even yellow.
Yeah, what the fuck is up with that?
Yeah, well, I have my own opinions on Rings of Power, but the problem is if you criticize the show, the loudest people criticizing the show online are like the most reactionary freaks who are like calling it woke. No, it's not woke. It's just not a very good show. I'm sorry. But that's a conversation for another time, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's and indeed, he does come up in conversation briefly during the Council of Elrond. Tom does, in the context of, well, why can't he just take the ring and hide it? Because
he'd lose it.
Yeah, he would literally lose it. And, eventually it would be found in some other way, and ultimately, like, if the rest of the world succumbed, then he himself would succumb, which, what you say about him being a stuffed animal, like a creature of legend right out of the childhood, does give that little snippet a new meaning, I think. The last vestige of this childhood, of this bedtime story, may itself disappear, but only if if you let go of everything else around it. I don't know. That's half formed.
Well, it's also they're leaving the Shire. They're leaving, safety. And in that moment, they are the most fairy tale like things tend to happen around the Shire. In The Hobbit, where is it that they literally encounter a talking bag? Well, it's on the outskirts of the Shire. That's where they're meeting trolls named Bill Huggins. And the further out you go from the Shire, the more like a fantasy novel as we've come to know it for adults, call that what you will. But imagining, dragons and swords and battles and then serious people are actually fucking dying versus the Hobbit, which is so, practically sparkles. That's the difference. And I think it's almost like leaving the world of the Hobbit as well. Because you immediately afterwards, you're gonna run now into Strider and the plot is really gonna hit.
I was gonna say you're gonna stride into a new world, but then
You're gonna stride straight in. So you are. Lenore, what are our immediate thoughts on Strider? Obviously colored by our perception of the Viggo Mortensen performance, but
I mean, first of all, perfect
why shouldn't it
casting.
be? Why shouldn't it be? Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, perfect casting. But he's also a little bit more sassy than I was led to expect. They as it happens, they were supposed to run into him a while back, and the what was it? But Barlaman Butterbur
Hmm.
is the guy who runs the Prancing Pony Inn where they take up. And as it happens, Gandalf passed him a letter which he was supposed to send to Frodo a while back and just like forgot about. So they
Hmm.
were actually supposed to run into Strider a while back.
You want me to describe him? I
Uh
love the description, initial
yeah,
description.
go
This
ahead.
is Strider says, suddenly Frodo noticed that a strange-looking, weather-beaten man sitting in the shadows near the wall was also listening intently to the Hobbit talk. He had a tall tankard in front of him and was smoking a long-stemmed pipe curiously carved. His legs were stretched out before him, showing high boots of supple leather that fitted him well, but had seen much wear and were now caked with mud. A travel-stained cloak of uh, heavy dark green cloth was drawn close about him, and in spite of the heat of the room, he wore a hood that overshadowed his face, but the gleam of his eyes could be seen as he watched the hobbits. And then there's rumors about him. I don't know who he is, but it is, he shows up in this tavern scene, which feels, like we said, all of this is so influential on what the fantasy genre becomes. And in here, we literally have the quintessential, the party meets for the first time in the tavern. And you've got the ranger right here sitting. And if you ever played D&D, you're going to have the guy in the tavern who stands up and sings, "Hey, diddle, diddle, the cat and the fiddle." And you're going to have the guy in the corner smoking a pipe, his eyes gleaming, thinking about his lost homeland. So,
God,
it goes all the way back,
I'm
baby.
so glad you brought that up. And the D&D connection is very apt. It's very well taken, because yeah, somebody will be brooding, somebody will be like doing something crazy, and
Someone
it's
will be
like,
drunk off their ass saying, "It comes in pints."
okay, yeah, you want to get up and distract everybody, roll for it.
Yeah.
And that was in we'll get back to Strider in a minute, but that was wild to me that Frodo. So of course, hey diddle diddle cat and fiddle, the cow jumped over. We've all heard the like nursery rhyme, and
Mhm.
Frodo to distract people from the fact that Merry and Pippin are about to spill the beans about who he is. He gets up on the table and he sings this like whole ass like saga that Tolkien says, yeah, it's degenerated into the nursery rhyme that we know today.
And it was written by Bilbo. It said Bilbo was rather fond of it, and indeed he wrote it himself, which is a
Hmm.
which is a good joke. Um, but yeah, and it's a whole. I mean, we won't go the whole thing here because it's genuinely like 2 pages long of stanzas, but it just keeps on going.
It might be
And
the
yeah,
longest song in the book.
hmm Um, it has at one point an asterisk on my version that it says elves and hobbits always refer to the sun as she to specify a certain
Yes,
part.
yes, mine too.
Um, I love that. But and this is a point that I wanted to make here. Tolkien has this and I mentioned in the last episode, but there are some people when they encounter Tolkien, specifically when they encounter the films of Lord of the Rings. Despite, everybody can agree it's a lot of fun. Some people are like, this feels a little bit, by the numbers. Because of course, when everything pulls from something, going back to it's going to feel by the numbers. There's a Seinfeld isn't funny effect, though I do think Seinfeld's funny, and I do think Lord of the Rings is good, obviously. People have that effect. When you read the books, this shit is just still weird though. Like this is still not standard fare. The elves and the Dark Lord and okay, some of that is become standard fantasy fare. This stuff though, like this is just Tom Bombadil and this and the language and just the choices that he makes throughout this book, it still remains just like deeply odd. And I really, really appreciate that about Lord of the Rings. That like even rereading it, I can be like for the I think actually like 13th or 14th time I've reread these books. Um, I can just be like, that's in there. Like, why? That's
Yeah.
awesome, but why? Why? Hey, what possessed him to put that in his book? It's remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you get when you have the conceit that yeah, this happened a long time ago in a Shire far, far away,
Hmm.
and like the world we live in now used to be that, right? So you're gonna see like bits and pieces and snatches of stuff that's just that you grow up in, aspects of culture and of language that you live in today, which intrigues me. Like. We'll skip a bit here. When Strider Aragorn, of course, when he tells the hobbits the story of Tinuviel, right?
Hmm.
Of this elf that was really hot a long time ago. And he says, "It's a fair tale, though it is sad, as are all the tales of Middle-earth, and yet it may lift up your hearts." And that really caught my eye, that all the tales of Middle-earth are sad. Like I've read I've read fantasy about like a world in decline, and like there's aspects of previous civilizations and histories and cultures that we can only guess at. um I don't know that I've read quite as convincing melancholy on that subject as I see here in Tolkien,
There's
because
a part in there's a part in the same passage where referencing to referencing to Frodo's song, Merry just enjoying himself says, "Jumped over the moon." Chuckled Merry as he rolled himself in his blanket. "Very ridiculous of you, Frodo, but I wish I had been there to see. The worthies of Bree will be discussing it 100 years hence." And then here's the notable part. "I hope so," said Strider. Then they all fell silent, and one by one the hobbits dropped off to sleep. In the same way, this Strider sees, he sees through the matrix, call it what you want, but he sees beyond what the hobbits can see. Not literally, just literally, because he's so much taller than them, though that too, but also he knows the history, he knows the context in which they live. He understands that they didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. He gets it. And he is able to say, yeah, I sure hope people are talking about this in 100 years. Like, I sure hope people are still doing this dumb shit in 100 years because I might roll my eyes at it, but it's a heck of a lot better than what I know is coming. And in the same context, he knows where they came from. He knows this decline. And in the same way, him talking about Luthien Tuneville, who is his great, 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 a million greats grandmother, sort of. And if you through one line, it's complicated. It's also notable because Tolkien will go on to, when he's buried, Beren and Luthien will be on his and his wife by sides gravestones. So very important, not just to the story, but literally so important to Tolkien that he will, make it manifest on his own grave. That also is a great dynamic there too, showing the Mary Strider dynamic. Once again, back
yeah,
at that
no,
D
you're
and D
absolutely
esque.
you're absolutely right, and it's in that dynamic as well that is illustrated. I mean, it's one of my favorite aspects of this book, is that the not only the knowledge that yes, there is this degeneration process that consigns everything eventually to the realms beyond memory, right? Everything is eventually forgotten and fades, and you can only see like glimpses of it at best. There's that, and there's also the knowledge that they could very well indeed be living in the end times,
Mhm.
and it's shot through this book, and it rears its head just when you think that you've gotten a moment to rest.
Hmm.
There's also this bit here It's neither here nor there. I just have this highlighted because my cat happened to step on the Kindle at exactly the right time. First he was a conspirator, Sam Gamgee. Now he'll end up by becoming a wizard or a warrior. But I think that will come into play later. Sorry,
You definitely
my cat has occasional insight.
no, we have to listen to Sheila's insight, no doubt. But they are headed on for Rivendell, and it's definitely not a moment too soon that they've met Strider because they are now getting hounded intently by the Nazgul, by those who live in death, these spooky phantoms. Um,
Somebody's been playing Elden Ring.
yes. Well, they actually, there's they do live in death. But I do realize now that I did just quote Elden Ring. Yes. Recentering.
They've met also. There is of course that I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but it's not C.S. Lewis. It's somebody else who during like a reading of this stuff is said to have exclaimed, "By God, not another elf." They've met two elves by the time they get to Rivendell. First, Gilrod, who has heard about their journey before they even get to Tom Bombadil, and then Glorfindel, who saves them from the Nazgul. He and Elrond do. Um,
Though the though I will say that happens after the battle at Weathertop, which is
yes,
so cool. Notably, the battle at Weathertop. So it's this ancient watchtower that's been destroyed, and the party as
that's where you get head from a cloud giant, Weathertop.
sure.
Sorry, go on.
um you they are traveling and they see flashes of light and thundering in the distance, like lightning jumping between the mountains. We'll find out later. Gandalf fought all 9 Nazgul at once there. Notable, another example of Tolkien not wanting to show us magic close up, a thing he loves to intentionally make obscure. But the Nazgul do come again against Strider and the others at Weathertop, and you have a dramatic confrontation in this moment. So they're gathered up on top, and then over the lip of the little dell on the side away from the hill, they felt rather than saw a shadow rise, one shadow or more than one. They strained their eyes, and the shadows seemed to grow. Soon there could be no doubt 3 or 4 tall black figures were standing there on the slope, looking down on them. So black were they seemed like black holes in the deep shade behind them. Frodo thought that he heard a faint hiss as of venomous breath and felt a thin, piercing chill. Then the shapes slowly advanced. Terror overcame Pippin and Merry, and they threw themselves flat on the ground. Sam shrank to Frodo's side. Frodo was hardly less terrified than his companions. He was quaking as if he was bitter cold, but his terror was swallowed up in a sudden temptation to put on the ring. The desire to do this laid hold of him, and he could think of nothing else. He did not forget the barrow nor the message of Gandalf, but something seemed to be compelling him to disregard all warnings, and he longed to yield, not with the hope of escape or of doing anything either good or bad. He simply felt that he must take the ring and put it on his finger. He could not speak. He felt Sam looking at him as if he knew that his master was in some great trouble, but he could not turn towards him. He shut his eyes and struggled for a while, but resistance became unbearable, and at last he slowly drew out the chain and slipped the ring on the forefinger of his left hand. And it goes on for a bit. But I wanted to read that because you have this moment here of Frodo encountering this evil directly and be forced to put on the ring. And then at this moment, he's stabbed, and it describes the stab wound as feeling like a blade of poisoned ice. And that's also an example of Tolkien writing this darkness, this evil. Because you remember how I mentioned Tolkien is not saying the terror in the outside world is other people. Aside from the example of a few bad folk, a few rotten apples, as it were, people are mostly decent folk in Tolkien's world. It's these outer powers. They're not quite, at this like Eldritch Lovecraft ununderstandable level, but they're getting there. They're this edge of human comprehension. There are these nightmares that are just underneath the bed. As you might remember in the Hobbit episode, the necromancer in the Hobbit is only able to exist to give that world shape, because there is a darkness at the edge of every world that Tolkien says children implicitly understand. And this is Frodo finally looking face to face with it, and he puts on the ring and sees these dead kings, and he faces this horror. And you don't have this grand battle. The battle happens after Frodo passes out. Strider shows up with fire and drives them off. But notably, unlike the badass scene in the movie, which I love and wouldn't cut, you don't have that. You just have this moment of darkness swallowing our main character. And that's a very intentional choice to not have a direct duel with the Nazgul. And in fact, Christopher Tolkien, Tolkien's J.R.R. Tolkien's son, was mad about the Weathertop scene in the movie because he said there shouldn't have been a sword fight there. That's not what that is. And I hate to disagree with Christopher because that scene fucking rules, but I totally understand where he's coming from.
It does, yeah, because the conceit here, as I see it, is look, there is this. Okay, first of all, they've encountered evil in the form of the Barrow Wights, right? There is this distinction that Tolkien makes between encountering this sort of foreign power in the form of Old Man Willow, right? And it's not malevolence that drives Old Man Willow to run afoul of the hobbits. It's, look, you've come into his house. He, as a tree, like his frame of reference is the sapient like creatures horning in on the forest and cutting down trees and using for firewood and whatnot. There's a reason he doesn't trust you. The brush with malevolence in the form of the Barrow Wights, actual malevolence. Kings being using necromancy to cling to life long beyond the decline of their kingdom. And Tom Bombadil shows up to bail you out of that. This is the first time where you've come face to face with true horror, true danger, and likely as not, that happens IRL. You're not going to be prepared for it.
Mm-hmm. And
what matters is recovery, is rebuilding.
Mm-hmm. Which we'll get into it more with later books, but Tolkien is so much more interested in rebuilding and recovery than he is actually in battle. And in the same way, you only see brief flashes of Gandalf fighting the Nazgul in the distance in this 1v9 battle. With this, it says, even as he swooned, he caught, as through a swirling mist, a glimpse of Strider leaping out of the darkness with a flaming brand of wood in either hand. With a last effort, Frodo, dropping his sword, slipped the ring from his finger and closed his right hand tight upon it. And Frodo wakes up in the next chapter and they're gone. That's the entirety of the battle with the Nazgul that you see in that moment. And I'll say later confrontations with the Nazgul, they never get much longer than that. They'll have moments of where they're looking for you. They'll have moments where you're hiding from them. There's one point where Gandalf and the Witch King kind of are like squaring up, looking at each other, like talking shit. But you never have, extended sword to sword duel, Aragorn versus the Nazgul, winner take all in these books. Because that is actually don't have a great because I just know that that's something that's intentional, because you don't have a character show up that many times and you hide the combat that many times. That is a very intentional choice from Tolkien.
Right. Because combat,
it's fascinating.
Combat is fleeting, like what matters much more is the effect on your psyche, is the effect on the land, is the ruins that it leaves in its wake. Again, people will meme about Tolkien like having like lots and lots of descriptions of this or that landform, right? Of people just talking on and on about that. It's because it's the environment that they've grown up in. It's this natural beauty that is in decline, that soon, like, there will be nobody to remember it. And that's the great the ultimate tragedy is, not merely the end of a story, but that there's nobody around to tell it. So
Hmm.
when you pass down the River Anduin, when you pass by this or that mountain, you know, talking about it, pointing it out, telling people what it means to you. I mean, it's an act of defiance in a way against the very real, very tangible march of time throughout this book. Speaking of marching, we come to Rivendell at last.
Yeah, after a quick encounter with Glorfindel, who is, I'm sorry, Glorfindel heads, not that important. He's just not that big a deal. Um, if you do want a quick piece of lore, Glorfindel is a reincarnating elf. If you've read the Silmarillion, so if you've read the Silmarillion, you're like Glorfindel, he's fucking back. Worth
Oh,
noting,
okay. So
worth
he's
noting, this guy killed a Balrog in his last life. Like, so
holy shit.
he died also in the fight. This is back in the days when the elves were way more powerful. Um, but yeah, in the defense of Gondolin, he soloed a Balrog, and they both died after fighting for like 14 days or something. It's pretty cool.
Okay, he's not just the Tolkien version of Glup Shitto. Like he's got some shit under his belt.
I mean, it's not like they spend a lot of time with him in the Silmarillion, though. I will note it's like the Battle of Gondolin. There's here, there's this, there's that. This guy did this, that's that. And then, like, in that, it's like, and Glorfindel held the pass for 2 weeks, fighting the Balrog to a standstill till both died, and he would later be reincarnated
Insane
here.
feat.
Yeah, no,
Insane feat.
crazy, crazy feat. In fact, one of two Balrogs that die in that battle because the king has a spiky helmet. I'm not kidding. And they're standing over a gigantic pool. Um, and he runs at Gothmog, Lord of all Balrogs, and impales him with the spike at the end of his helmet, like his decorative helmet crown. And the two Gothmog, who's like is smaller than the other ones. That's just how he presents himself because they can change shape, had made himself smaller. They topple into the water, and the king clings to him, and he literally drowns in the water. And like it says the water boils them both to death. Pretty fucking sick.
That's incredible. God damn.
Yeah, they
Eh,
still lose the battle though. um, and that's
but
Gondolin.
also
Yeah.
like fucking like to have the only snatch of that incredible feat of, yeah, I fought this guy for 2 weeks before we both died. Like, just to have that fact and none of the facts of that case, that are all
Mhm.
that's left in memory. That in itself is really fucking intriguing.
Well, and I bring it up not just because I want to like show that I know the Tolkien lore, but also because this comes back to the thing Tolkien keeps hitting. Everything here used to be so much more.
Hmm.
Glorfindel, this guy that is running from ring wraiths, he used to be able to like flick these guys like off their horses, in his original back in the day. Elrond was there when they beat Sauron in a sword fight, you know, as we'll get there, all these different things. Aragorn is carrying around a broken sword, but like he is remembering everything used to be so much more than it currently is. Um,
Well, in Middle Earth Shadow of War, you can be Sauron in a sword fight.
that's true. That's true. Famously beloved by Tolkien fans. Of course, famously. Um, Fun fact, Aragorn was supposed to fight Sauron in a sword fight in the original cut of Return of the King.
Yeah, it would have been goofy as hell.
Yeah, they changed it to a giant troll and it works a lot better.
Mhm.
Um, Nevertheless, they make it to Rivendell and they reunite with Bilbo. Old man Bilbo's here. They have a lot of fun. We sing a lot of songs. We sing a lot of songs. We sing a lot of songs. Frodo gets cured of his wound from getting stabbed, though he'll be injured for the rest of his life. With no,
I love the dramatic irony here of Gandalf. He's with Frodo as he recovers. And this really caught my eye. Gandalf moved his chair to the bedside and took a good look at Frodo. The color had come back to his face, and his eyes were clear and fully awake and aware. He was smiling, and there seemed to be little wrong with him. But to the wizard's eye, there was a faint change, just a hint, as it were, of transparency about him, and especially about the left hand that lay outside upon the coverlet. Still, that must be expected, said Gandalf to himself. He is not half through yet, and to what he will come in the end, not even Elrond can foretell. Not to evil, I think. He may become like a glass filled with a clear light for eyes to see that can. You look splendid, he said aloud. I love all that is kept from we get a sense of what Gandalf is knows and experiences, and I love all that is said and unsaid in what he chooses to reveal.
Well, now is the time for everybody to make their decision on what we're going to do about this ring. What are we going to do about this whole situation? Because we're well through this book and we've not seen any fellowship of any ring. Well, what are we talking about here? What are we? Some kind of fellowship of the ring? Like we're in those hours, and Elrond calls a council, the most notorious chapter in all of these books. The Council of Elrond begins, and Elrond says, "This is the doom that we must deem." And all these important people have been gathered together. And important fact not noted in the movie: none of these people were just summoned here. They all came to Rivendell for different reasons. Boromir from Gondor is here because he is trying to solve a riddle from a dream. Legolas from Mirkwood is here to report some bad news. Some of the dwarves are, on a journey of their own right to talk about the threat that is coming from Mordor. Obviously, the elves, some of them were just there. The hobbits came on their own journey. Gandalf came to meet with the hobbits. Strider is there with the hobbits, and all the right people are here to form a council of Elrond. And I find it notable that the people who have to make this monumental decision are thrust into that position. They are competent. They are the correct people to be making the decision for the most part. Like, it is a solid, like if you were choosing a group, it's a pretty solid group. But it is notable that Elrond's like, because of fate, we are the people to make the decision here. And I find that to be interesting. It's another little sort of insight into Tolkien thinking about how the world works.
Hmm. And we get a little bit of a look back in time here. Like I mentioned, I remember on the Hobbit episode how, you meet Beorn the Skin Changer, right? And then they don't come back. I was wrong as it happens. They are mentioned again. Frodo learned that grim Beorn the Old, son of Beorn, was now the lord of many sturdy men, and to their land between the mountains and Mirkwood neither orc nor wolf dared to go.
Hmm.
So you get kind of a really you get a really fun this is in the intervening 90 years since the Hobbit, civilization, cities, kingdoms have come once again to the waste that once surrounded the desolation of Smaug.
I mean, yeah, Lonely Mountain is an up and running kingdom.
It's
In
no
fact,
longer lonely.
yeah, so up and running that they tried to start another kingdom in their old place of Moria and vanished. Remember Balin? Yeah, that guy. We haven't heard from him in 30 years. Sorry.
I'm sure he's fine.
No,
He's in Moria balling right now.
he's balling out. He he's certainly he's reunited with Thorin, we'll say that. But they have this Council of Elrond where they make the decision. And it's a decision that we all know that they're gonna make, which is they gotta go to Mordor and destroy this fucking ring. It's the only way.
There's also I will point out as well, Bomber. You remember Bomber from The Hobbit?
Of
Sorry,
course.
I just stumbled across this.
Of course, the
So
big fella.
Bomber was now so fat that he could not move himself from his couch to his chair at table, and it took six young dwarves to lift him. Which there's a certain, there's a certain humor about it, yes, but it's also a little more grotesque than Tolkien ever got when he was, of course, like Bomber, like, fat jokes and whatnot in The Hobbit, but you don't have to think about that very hard to be like, man, this is a grim kind of existence, you know?
Bomber is also the same guy who got his mind wiped in The Hobbit.
That's right. Holy shit, when he
He
was in
goes through
the
some bad shit.
Yeah, and it's like, wow, like there's the Beornings are kicking around, and like Dale is doing cool, Lake Town's doing fine. And then there's this guy who just kind of come to like he's basically become a gout elemental. Like
Hmm.
it's not always that great, and
The
at least to me, it's something of a, it's not gratuitous, but it's just like a maturation from The Hobbit, I think,
Sure.
because not everybody lives happily ever after.
I mean, and it's worth noting in the same moment, reintroducing other characters. Gollum is back in play. He was captured in Mirkwood, but now he is out. The Gollum is loose. You find that out in this moment, among other things. But they really get into the ring here. They get into some specifics. I like the chapter because I love, the lore and all that, but I understand some people get exhausted reading this part of the book. But they go into very, very specific detail here, a moment where Tolkien is able to just talk about his lore endlessly, which he loves to do, and he's got a reason to do it because not all the characters know. So they explain to the other character. That's how he tends to introduce things. He doesn't tend to have the narrator tell you things. He tends to have like a lore master in universe, and they all have their own way of talking, and they speak in this very dramatic, the same way that in Shakespeare, there's just a sort of way characters talk, a way they communicate, at least if they're from a certain group. Same thing in Middle Earth. There's just a way some people talk, and they go back and forth, and they give these dramatic speeches. This is where you meet Boromir, and Boromir is like, Gondor stands, but we sure could use some help. Also, we've been at war with Mordor for the last several lives of men, which is something that you wouldn't know if you hadn't read the book. Yeah, like Gondor has actually been actively fighting this war for like generations,
Yeah,
which is
and
notable.
yeah, and it's you read that and you're like, really, really, and like the line hasn't moved in that time. Like, you hear about the kingdoms of men like being, I believe Rohan literally sends a tribute of horses to Mordor every year. It's like, hasn't somebody done something about that in that time? Like, I mean, you get the sense of, okay, well, it might be even worse if it weren't for the men of Gondor, but like you really do get the sense that, yeah, the fighting is valiant, but he's really just delaying the inevitable here.
I mean, yeah, and he doesn't want to show that himself, but like it's also notable how disconnected these people are because he has to like look for Rivendell. It's not like he knew it existed, but he had to ask around to find Rivendell, which is like should be, you know, you'd think they'd have a map that shows specifically where it is. When he encounters hobbits, he's like, "Oh yeah, I heard these guys exist. That's crazy." You know, this world is very disconnected, despite Gondor being, if you look at the map, a pretty sizable kingdom. Um, this is once again, I come back to it. It is a world in severe decline. And this is now where I feel I can mention why the world is the way it is. And it is because the
Because of
elves,
woke,
yes, because of woke.
obviously.
And that's why let me see if I can land this plane. That's why Faramir was dreaming and Boromir had his dream because he's anti-woke. Boromir would be the anti-woke character if there
He
was
would.
somebody. Or Gimli, let's be honest. Gimli is like the anti-woke gay guy. That's Gimli's a log cabin Republican.
I've met John
Um,
Reese. I've met John Reese Davies.
have you?
He is definitely that type.
There you go. Um, all that to say, I'll now tell you Jacob's socialist shelf reveal. Why is Middle Earth in so much decline? Why haven't they been able to rebuild? This is why. It's because the elves won't fucking leave. That's actually the reason. The elves will not fucking leave. They're not supposed to be there anymore, right? This is the third age. Okay. I'm gonna get mad at the elves, but I'm serious. This is the third age of the world, right? You have the first age, which is the age of like the legends of the elves, the second age, which is this age of coexistence, and you have the third age after the defeat of Sauron. Um and it's the first defeat of Sauron, and the elves at this point are hanging around a few elf population centers, and it's around the ones who have great rings because there are the three elven rings, and Elrond and Galadriel each have one, and they're literally using them to maintain the conditions of the second age in their specific realms of Rivendell and of Lothlorien, and they literally use the magic of the rings to sustain that. And then you also have Gandalf with the third fire ring going around and sort of giving a little extra juice to places. But the world is not allowed to move into another stage because we are still rehashing the battles of the last age. We are still fighting the same guy, Sauron, who was supposed to be destroyed, and we are still all going and asking, what do we do to these people who should not fucking be here? And that is a very notable thing, is like a big part of this is because the people of the past, and, you know, because some people are immortal, the people who are there, they screwed it up for everybody. They won victories that were fruitless victories. They tore down the tower and they did not rip up the foundations. Yeah, they cut the finger, but they did not destroy the ring. You know, they won the election, but they did not liquidate the opposite. No, I'm kidding. They did not get rid of the January Sixers. They merely put them in prison. You know what I mean? That's what we're
They
looking at.
didn't conduct the purge.
That's They didn't. They didn't do it.
Well, and indeed, you're absolutely right. I mean, this takes me back to a note that I made very, very early on. The beginning of Hobbits lies far back in the elder days that are now lost and forgotten. Only the elves still preserve any records of that vanished time, and their traditions are concerned almost entirely with their own history, in which men appear seldom and hobbits are not mentioned at all. Again, you have this long, storied civilization that tells the same stories over and over and over. You know, like they've long outlived their relationship to the wider world, you know, outside of the context of, you know, finally wrapping up this contradiction that they refused to or that they failed indeed earlier to resolve.
Would you say that the old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born, and now is the time of monsters?
Let's not jump to conclusions.
Okay. Gramsci reading Lord of the Rings, like, no. Gramsci died shortly before The Hobbit was released. So unfortunate. R.I.P. Gramsci, you would have loved Middle-earth. I'm deciding. So yeah, they form the Fellowship of the Ring. They, in both the book and the movie, look at the camera and do the "what are we, some kind of Fellowship of the Ring" moment, which I enjoy. I always love that. And Boromir blows his horn and lets everybody know they're coming because they've got this group of 9, and then we introduce a bunch of new characters here. They all get thrown into the party.
I do as well, like yes, it's exhausting, yes, the Council of Elrond goes on for a while, there is a lot of chilling with elves in this book. Maybe like fully a quarter is spent in Rivendell and later Lothlorien, just chilling with elves and getting up to date and like recharging for the next leg of the journey. But in those moments of meditation, like you do get a sense of genuine uncertainty, genuine pathos. I couldn't help but think of I'm sure we mentioned this on the show before. You remember our comrade, our friend Alec, right? Who was like, look, like
listener of the show.
Yeah,
Shout
exactly.
out.
What's going on, Alec? He said that yeah, when I was y'all's age, I thought that I'd be up on the barricades like fighting in the big time. And now it falls to future generations, and y'all will have to do what you will with it. Do what you do the best with it, right? It really captures that moment here when Frodo and Bilbo have been having their songs and they've been talking and catching up. The music and singing around them seems to falter, and a silence fell. Bilbo looked quickly at Frodo's face and passed his hand across his eyes. "I understand it now," he said. "Put it away. I'm sorry. Sorry you've come in for this burden. Sorry about everything. Don't adventures ever have an end? I suppose not. Someone else always has to carry on the story. Well, it can't be helped. I wonder if it's any good trying to finish my book. But let's worry about it now. Let's have some real news. Tell me all about the Shire,
And I love that. Let's have some real news because it's a joke, but it's also not a joke.
Yeah, and you have to allow yourself to, you don't know how, I mean, my grandmother always apologizes, to me. She doesn't have to, but, she apologizes about the world that, like, her generation has left us. And it's like, look, that world is still here and it's still going on. There are people still fighting for it, and it's going to get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. And you have to allow yourself to take joy in what is.
Are elves the boomers of Middle-earth?
Okay, Glorfindel.
There's gotta be a elf's name who rhymes with boomer that we can say okay, whatever, but I can't think of one. Um,
I'm gonna come across a crazy fucking name in one of these next couple of books,
mhm.
and I will be unable to shut up about it. I guarantee you.
The name that I can't shut up about is what Frodo's real name is. If you say it in Hobbitish, it's Mora Lebingi. So
Mora Labingi. Oh yeah, we did mention this.
yeah, but
Oh yes, I can. The name that I can't shut up about. Yeah, they're talking about the River Anduin. There it casts its arms around the steep shores of the Isle and falls then with a great noise and smoke over the cataracts of Rauros down into the Nindalf, the Wet Wang, as it is called in your tongue. And I have a note here that's just excuse me.
see, so far you've pointed out Daddy Two Foot and the Wet Wang. Uh,
Are you a 2 foot or are you a Wet Wang? Vote now on your devices.
Shire no. Um, there are two notable things here that you'll note we're not talking about, and that is on purpose, and it's because there are two more books. I am not bringing up Gandalf's stay in Isengard because we have a lot to say about Isengard and we should just not do it in this episode because we're going to have a whole Two Towers episode. And I am not talking about Aragorn's destined role as the king because Return of the King is coming. And yes, both of these things are important in this book. Yes, Gandalf gets kidnapped by Saruman. Yes, we've got the broken sword. And this
There's
is
a
not the
wonderful,
time
there's
to
a
elaborate.
wonderful, there's a wonderful bit where like Saruman says, "Yeah, I'm Saruman of many colors," and his robe's like really cool, and Gandalf's like, "I liked white better."
Yes.
Like he
And
just has to be like, Saruman tries to stunt on him, and Gandalf just has to be a bitch about it.
right. But the reason that I'm not going into detail on these things, listener, you might be like, but what about the whole part? I'm not doing that because we've got two more episodes about Middle Earth coming. And so let's save some Two Towers for the Two Towers and some Return of the King for the Return of the King. What we've got now is the Fellowship of the Ring. And who makes up this fellowship, Lenore? Who are our nine to face the nine?
Well, we got our four hobbits, as y'all are aware. We got Gandalf, y'all will remember. We got the two men, Aragorn and Boromir, and then we got Legolas and Gimli. We got the Prince of the Elves of Mirkwood and Gimli, who is the son of Gloin, who is one of the dwarf party from The Hobbit.
Glowin is
Um,
very much a up jumped glup shitto in this world. He is very much like a. You remember Glowin?
Oh my God, it's
It's
glowing!
everybody's favorite guy, Glowin. Now, if you think about it, Hobbit coming out in the 30s, there was somebody who waited like 15 years on this, so they're just going to be like, "Holy shit, Glowin!"
Well, and I'll tell you what I appreciate is and this is jumping ahead a little bit of the journey through Moria, but I do appreciate the character moment that we have between Gimli and Legolas that we don't really get in the film because we kind of jump straight to their friendship in the film, but here, there's beef between the dwarves and the elves, and how do they ultimately overcome it? Well, they have to make a sacrifice for each other, right? When they get to Lothlorien, like Gimli's not allowed to, he has to Haldir, who's like the captain of the elf guard there or whatever, says, "Okay, well, we got to blindfold the dwarf while he's in this secret like elf kingdom." And Legolas is like, "Look, I'll be blindfolded as well." And finally, Aragorn is like, "Guys, we're all gonna be blindfolded." And that's and that really that really jumped out at me, that like this it's so rare that you get to visit this other like aspect of your civilization, and you're willing to forego the beauty so that your friend that this dude that you've barely met isn't left out. And there is a reason that the text says, yeah, they become fast friends as they're leaving Lothlorien.
Yeah. So those are those two guys who are very much defined by their relationship to each other. And I would say also just are the representatives of their respective species in the party,
Hmm.
being the only dwarf, the only elf. They are very much the representative of dwarves. Everything we see and think about dwarves, we've got in Gimli, everything we see and think about elves, right down to the fact that in fiction now, what do we see? We see dwarves with the axe, we see elves with the bow, like that the litheness, the quickness versus the dwarves being robust, strong, hardy. These are things that Tolkien pulled from folklore, but they get solidified in this party. Like they get solidified here in this fellowship. It is like it is the you are watching tropes come to be in real time here. Tropes that, by the way, didn't fully exist in The Hobbit. If you read The Hobbit, elves and dwarves different than what we're looking at here. You've got retcons to explain why they weren't acting this way, but Gimli is not the guy who shows up at your house wearing the colored hood, who's juggling plates, who is like 2 feet tall, basically a gnome. No, this is basically like a guy who's short, who's incredibly like jacked and has an
Exactly,
axe, right?
exactly. And the elves have gone from, their tra-la-la-lally all down in the valley to our civilization is in decline and we can only preserve a shadow of what we once were, like it's a bit.
The funny thing is they were still in that boat in The Hobbit, but they were just in denial at that point. You got to
Mhm.
imagine being Gandalf. He's so grumpy in The Hobbit. And you got to imagine being Gandalf just being like, these motherfuckers who won't leave and are ruining fucking everything and destroyed everything. They've spent the last 1,000 years singing about their goddamn valley. It's like, I cannot wait for Sauron to come back because either I'll die or he will, and we get to leave regardless. You gotta look at it from Gandalf's perspective. I would be pissed.
There is also, I do appreciate it's Glowin who talks about I don't know if it's specifically the mouth of Sauron, but it's a messenger from Sauron
It's
coming.
supposed to be the mouth of Sauron. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. He comes to the Dwarf Kingdom and he says, "Hey, like, help us find this ring. It's just like a normal ring, guys. We swear."
Yeah, he
And
literally says the least of rings, a
yes,
trifle, which is pretty funny.
yes, and let's see. At that, his breath came like the hiss of snakes, and all who stood by shuddered. But Dane, the dwarf lord, said, "I say neither yea nor nay. I must consider this message and what it means under its fair cloak." "Consider well, but not too long," said he, the messenger of Sauron. "The time of my thought is my own to spend," answered Dane. "For the present," said he, and rode into the darkness. And it's a very, from the outside, yeah, it's a very, very, like, tropey villain line. But, as Glowin goes on to explain, heavy have the hearts of our chieftains been since that night. We needed not the fell voice of the messenger to warn us that his words held both menace and deceit, for we knew already that the power that has re-entered Mordor has not changed, and ever it betrayed us of old. So it's not just that the mouth of Sauron can't resist being evil here. He's referring to a very specific relation that both parties are aware of, right? That this one state is in decline, that this other formation is rebounding, and that soon, the contradiction will resolve itself whether they will it or no.
No doubt.
Speaking of things resolving themselves, they go to Moria.
Well, first they try and go over the mountain, they lose, and then they go. They just can't handle the ice. I don't have a lot to say about it. They're not good at climbing mountains.
Yeah,
There's a spirit of the mountain. It's just its own thing. In the movie, they make it Saruman because, frankly, like I don't really know what the deal with the spirit of the mountain is. It's just a thing, just another thing in the world. Don't worry about it. They go to Moria.
I do appreciate here as well. There's several pages. It kind of goes on where like Aragorn and Boromir are going back and forth. Like, hey, should we light a fire? No, then everybody will see us. Should we light a fire now? No, everybody's gonna see us. Should we light a fire now? And like the third time that Boromir asks, finally Aragorn's like, yeah, we're all gonna freeze to death otherwise. So like, you might as well, right? Let's see. "If there are any to see, then I at least am revealed to them," he said. "I've written Gandalf is here, and signs that all can read from Rivendell to the mouths of Anduin," Gandalf says. But the company cared no longer for watchers or unfriendly eyes. Their hearts were rejoiced to see the light of the fire. The wood burned merrily, and though all round it the snow hissed and pools of slush crept under their feet, they warmed their hands gladly at the blaze. There they stood, stooping in a circle round the little dancing and blowing flames. A red light was on their tired and anxious faces. Behind them the night was like a black wall, but the wood was burning fast, and the snow still fell. And that is, I think, the most ominous line that I've seen in Tolkien so far. The wood was burning fast, and the snow still fell. Like,
Mhm.
what I said earlier about, not being afraid to take comfort in what is, you know, eventually you do drift back to, yeah, but what is ain't gonna be is much longer.
You have another ominous thing not too long from here because in Moria, in these caves, they find the dead bodies of the dwarves who came here with with Balin, R.I.P. to a real one. And they've got a book that says the notes, we cannot get out, we cannot get out, and then
They're
they start
coming.
hearing drum beats.
And then
Doom,
Legolas
doom,
says that
doom.
we cannot get out, and Gimli says they are coming,
Yes.
which that's, I love
And
that
it
echo there.
and the drums literally say doom, 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 And of course that's the sound of a drum, but it's literally you are doomed, like looking at you. And you have this dramatic stand, and you have a moment where Frodo gets his lick in. He says, he fights, and you all have that, but you have part where Frodo says, or Frodo felt a hot wrath blows up in his heart. The Shire, he cried, and springing beside Boromir, he stooped and stabbed with sting at the hideous foot. There was a bellow, and the foot jerked back, nearly wrenching sting from Frodo's arm. Black drops dripped from the blade and smoked on the floor. Like you have like a little moment like that where Frodo is, he did his thing, and Aragorn says, "One for the Shire. The hobbit's bite is deep." Like they're like giving him a little shout out. Then they all proceed to kill like 7 guys apiece. But it's all leading up to the confrontation Gandalf's been worried about. It's all leading up to the Balrog. And they do not have prime form Glorfindel here with them. They just have Gandalf and the Balrog, and these two are about to face off. And what is a Balrog? It is a demon of the ancient world. It is another example of something that once walked the world, something that used to be scary, but something you could interact with. And now it's like this overwhelmingly powerful force in this degraded world that they woke up because they dug too deep. I could get more specific about this very particular Balrog and his origin because he does have one,
Of course
but
he fucking does.
but it doesn't matter all that much. What matters is this guy is old, and I mean really fucking old. I mean, this guy specifically is actually older than Middle Earth, older than the Earth having form. This Balrog was there when the universe got created. This one
So,
specifically that they're
so
up
what was he
against.
doing? What was he doing before Middle Earth?
Oh, he was helping create the world with the gods.
God
He's
damn,
he's a minor god.
that's incredible.
Yeah, no,
Holy
he
hell.
was because the Earth got created by singing, by a giant chorus. And he was one of the people who, when Morgoth, the original bad guy, fucked up the world by singing bad things into the song. And then Morgoth's chief lieutenant, Sauron, some translations say his son, some versions say otherwise, also joined the song. They convinced a bunch of people around him to rebel with them. And this Balrog was one of them.
Oh yeah.
And then
Yeah.
in the first great battle, when Tolkis defeated Morgoth in fisticuffs before the birth of the sun, this Balrog happened to fall down a pit and get covered by a mountain,
And
and
then
he
the
was
world
stuck.
became and then after Morgoth was defeated, the world became less goth.
Yes, actually, that's correct. The world is the Silmarillion is an extremely goth book. Have you read you? I know you've read The Lost Children of Hurin. Everybody's a goth in that world, but Sauron brings it back. But nevertheless, that is, I said I wasn't going to tell you, but yeah, that's where the Balrog comes from. He was, and very unfortunately, in a battle so far back in time that the sun wasn't out, got thrown down a hole and had a mountain dropped on his head. Didn't manage to get out until the dwarves delved too deep and too greedily.
Yeah, they're looking for like magic silver or whatever, which is mithril.
Mithril.
Yes.
Yes. Another fantasy term Tolkien made up.
That's incredible, man.
Mhm.
You're it's like going antiquing and like going through all kinds of old stuff and be like, oh wait, that's where this comes from.
Yes.
And I love the after these long paragraphs, what do you get between Gandalf and the Balrog? Two set apart sentences here. From out of the shadow, a red sword leaped flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. And that's like the extent of their fight. Like there was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. And like it's a single stroke battle, and that's all you need because you have that context leading up to it of Legolas too knows exactly what's coming. He's heard the stories. And so you have that context leading up to this incredible confrontation in which, as it turns out, it's only the beginning.
Hmm. Because they get ripped. Yeah, at this point, Gandalf gets ripped down into the pit dark below. And for all intents and purposes, for the rest of this book, he's dead. Now we know he's not, but I mean, he is. He actually does die, but he will come back. He gets better.
Which, if you only know Gandalf from The Hobbit, holy shit, your kindly mentor has died.
Yeah, no, RIP. And I mean, that's definitely a part of the hero's journey. But once again, another example of Tolkien doesn't really want to show you that much magic because they're going to have a magic duel, and it's really not for you to see. You,
Yes.
I said it in the Hobbit episode, and I'll say it again. Humans are not meant to look at the face of God. Moses, holiest of humans, looking just at the back of God in the Bible, died from the exposure. And this same type of thing. You aren't meant to look at it, and these brief glimpses are really enough to be an experience unto itself. And that's how Tolkien viewed religion, and that's how he also views his magic, which is gets elaborated on slightly more a little later, but it is interesting though, and it is also very sad because R.I.P. Gandalf, because everybody feels safe with Gandalf around. Now he's gone. What if we run into another Balrog? Sorry, but nobody else is able to do that.
He's Gandalf.
Uh,
Yeah.
he's sad. Yeah, just sad music plays.
So
Um,
after their
yeah, we're getting close to the end here.
yeah, and it's doubly tragic that they lose Gandalf so close to the end of Moria, because as it happens, it's literally just like right around the corner is the exit, pretty much.
It's like, yeah, bro,
And
just take a few more steps.
yeah,
I mean, the
literally.
Balrog can come outside, so yeah, he would have had to fight him.
Yeah, yeah. And then they have to keep moving on, because orcs will often pursue foes for many leagues into the plain, if they have a fallen captain to avenge, which is not my experience playing Shadow of War, especially if you've taken the perk that gives enemies a morale penalty if you kill a captain of theirs, but neither here nor there.
Well, you got to understand Shadow of War happens prior to the events of this book.
True.
And at this point, Sauron's kind of whipped them into shape.
Yeah.
He's learned his lesson.
We
He's
still
tired of this rivals system where they're fighting each other. No, no, no. They get centralized.
We need to read that. There's that like bootleg Russian novel that's like from the perspective of Sauron and the orcs, like them
The
building their
Last Ring Bearer.
state. Yeah,
I've never read it, but I do intend to at some point.
yeah. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about there.
No doubt.
They go to Lothlorien.
This is the second elven haven that shouldn't exist from the ancient days that is like insanely beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, they meet Haldir, they meet Galadriel and Celeborn, who are the king and the queen here. And we also get a sense it's been alluded to by Frodo because as it happens, Homeboy's got some like heightened, enhanced senses. He can kind of detect things that are beyond the veil and like otherwise weird, as a result of recovering from being stabbed with the Morgul blade. And he thinks that somebody might be following them while they're in Moria. He's right about it. There's a creepy little dude like wandering among the trees, who's been tracking them for days and days and days. It's Gollum.
hmm Gollum, he's back in play. He'll be much more important in the next two books. But we gotta note that Gollum is lurking around. Best character alert. Be on the lookout for more Gollum appearances in the coming weeks.
Gollum, I barely know.
Smeagol, no. Gollum, I barely know. We'll stick with that. Lady Galadriel is hella creepy. And I think this is a really cool uh Lady Galadriel is
She's the sort of character who like, kind of like Lady Dimitrescu from fucking Resident Evil 8. Like if she were invented today, the internet would be very normal about her.
mm, she the thing about Galadriel is they do a great job here. It's a way that I don't know why, but he doesn't do it with Elrond. That Galadriel is despite being good, so old and so removed from the world and so powerful that she is scary. She is looking into your mind. She is this pale, glowing, powerful being. She says, "Do you want to see some elf magic?" Even though I don't really know what you mean, because you call both dark and light magic magic. And she shows him this mirror that is showing these future possible events. He sees glimmering starlight around her hand and sees she's bearing a ring. And, obviously, you have this woman here who is I mean, she is the oldest living being aside from the gods and Treebeard. So she's like the third oldest living being on whatever. Like she's ancient. She's like top 10 most whatever it is, top few oldest living beings.
Number 7 will shock you.
Yeah, number 7 will shock you. Burger King foot lettuce. Lady Galadriel. But you have this moment with her that is important because you remember I was talking about how everything is fucked up because of the elves, and that they won't leave and they messed up their job. So Frodo realizes that she has a ring and that's her power is coming from that. And then, yes, she said, it is not permitted to speak of it, and Elrond could not do so, but it cannot be hidden from the ring bearer and one who has seen the eye. Verily, it is the land of Lorien upon the finger of Galadriel that one of the 3 remains. This is Ninya, the ring of adamant, and I am its keeper. He suspects, but he does not know, not yet. Do you not see now wherefore your coming is to us as the footsteps of doom? For if you fail, then we are laid bare to the enemy. Yet if you succeed, then our power is diminished, and Lothlorien will fade, and the tides of time will sweep it away. We must depart into the west, or dwindle to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten. And Frodo says, I'll give you the one ring if you ask for it. And she has this moment that, is very dramatic where it says she lifted up her hand and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I passed the test, she said. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. And that is extremely important because you have this moment of the elves reckoning with their place in history and this possibility being offered Galadriel, this representative of all elves, basically, like the oldest elf that currently is living, most powerful elf that currently is living, has the opportunity to keep this thing going. And the whole problem is that they try to keep this thing going. Keep this. It's not a mode of production, but let's be Marxist about it. This mode of production going. Let's do a necro-capitalism. Like, let's continue this fucking ancient, outmoded thing because we like how it is. We like how it looks. It's not supposed to exist anymore. It served its function. We are riding this thing till it falls apart. We are taking this horse to the glue factory, and she has the opportunity to give it another shot in the arm. And she chooses not to. And it is a very significant moment that requires a very deep reading of the text and understanding of the world to quite get the totality of, especially considering in the Silmarillion, a lot of the problems in the first place emerge from the elves. Well, they emerge from this type of behavior going the other way. Shout out to Fëanor. Sorry about the fact that you burned to ashes after you got stabbed.
And the fact I hate when that happens.
Yeah, no,
And
it
the
happens to
fact
me all the time.
and the fact that there is a horse, the fact that there is this march of this march of time and contradictions, it lays low even the greats and the aged and the storied. Like we passed over it here. Frodo bent his head, and what do you wish? He said at last. That what should be shall be, she answered. The love of the elves for their land and their works is deeper than the deeps of the sea, and their regret is undying and cannot ever wholly be assuaged. Yet they will cast all away rather than submit to Sauron, for they know him now. For the fate of Lothlorien you are not answerable, but only for the doing of your own task. Yet I could wish, were it of any avail, that the One Ring had never been wrought, or had remained forever lost. It puts me in mind of, if we go way, way back to chapter 2, right? But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, Gandalf says, the Dark Lord. The rumors that you've heard are true. He has indeed arisen again and left his hold in Mirkwood and returned to his ancient fastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. Like, regret, right? Being caught in suddenly interesting times. It's the great equalizer of the tall and the small, truly.
No doubt. And at this point, the book is also showing this equalizer of the tall and the small, because as this book reaches its very end, the ring is working its magic on the party. Very specifically, it's working its magic on Boromir, who has a very good reason to want to claim this power. He wants to defend his people who have, even more context than the movie, have been bleeding and dying now for decades in this just long slog of a war that they just found out. And this is so, I mean, you get mad on their behalf. You just found out, oh, no, Sauron hadn't really sent his main army. These were just like some guys he was sending at y'all to like keep y'all busy. No, his army's still coming. Imagine the sheer horror. And the great bridge just fell, and he and 3 other guys survived this battle. Like, it's just this horrifying, and this shadow is coming in, and he doesn't know what to do. And he's like, I'm going to take this ring. I'm going to get power with this ring. I'm going to make things better. You feel for Boromir, and if you actually think about it. And you have this moment that, Tolkien loves to return to it. The hobbits having this moment of virtue, the hobbits being the ones to actually put their finger on the scales of history. And you have Frodo experience something similar to what Boromir has been experiencing. And it's this moment where he puts on the ring. That's a no, not supposed to do that. And he has this moment of transcendence in the woods. And it says, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's this beautiful scene where he's looking out and he can see all the world all around him. It's so fucking cool. But it says, everywhere he looked, he saw the signs of war. The misty mountains were crawling like ant hills. Orcs were issuing out of 1,000 holes. Under the boughs of Mirkwood, there was deadly strife of elves and men and fell beasts. The land of the Beornings was aflame. A cloud was over Moria. Smoke rose on the borders of Lorien. Horsemen were galloping on the grass of Rohan. Wolves poured from Isengard. From the havens of Harad, ships of war put out to sea. And out of the east, men were moving endlessly. Swordsmen, spearmen, bowmen upon horses. Chariots of chieftains and laden wains. All the power of the Dark Lord was in motion. Then turning south again, he beheld Minas Tirith. Far away it seemed, and beautiful, white-walled, many-towered, proud and fair upon its mountain seat. Its battlements glittered with steel. Its turrets were bright with many bearers. Banners. Hopes leaped in his heart, but against Minas Tirith was set another fortress, greater and more strong. Thither, eastward, unwilling, his eye was drawn. It passed the ruined bridges of Osgiliath, the grinning gates of Minas Morgul, and the haunted mountains, and it looked upon Gorgoroth, the valley of Terror, and the land of Mordor. Darkness lay there under the sun. Fire glowed amid the smoke. Mount Doom was burning, and a great reek rising. Then at last his gaze was held, wall upon wall, battlement upon battlement, black, immeasurably strong, mountain of iron, gate of steel, tower of adamant. He saw it. Barad-dûr, fortress of Sauron. All hope left him. And suddenly he felt the eye. There was an eye in the dark tower that did not sleep. He knew that it had become aware of his gaze. A fierce, eager will was there. It leaped towards him, almost like a finger. He felt it searching for him. Very soon it would nail him down, know just exactly where he was. Amon Law it touched. It touched upon Tol Brandir. He threw himself from the seat, crouching, covering his head and his gray hood. And he has a moment where he struggles to pull off the ring, and he pulls it off. And all of a sudden the sky is clean and blue and the birds sing in every tree. And he said, I will now do what I must. This at least is plain, and evil of the ring is already at work among the company, and the ring must leave them before it does more harm. And you have this moment where the Hobbit is able to make his choice, and he is able to do something the others around him can't do. He is able to, defeat something with, I would say, greater ease than Galadriel does. Galadriel, who has all the context, he is able to defeat something Boromir cannot defeat. Defeat something that eventually the rest of the party would not be able to defeat, save one. We know who that is, being Sam. And you also have just this masterful moment of Tolkien saying, yeah, I know we're at the end of the book, but stay tuned. So some shit is about to go down because look at all this. But it's this great grandiose moment that then shrinks down to a pinprick. And it is Tolkien at some of his finest, which is this guy seeing all of it. He gets it. He gets the context. He's no longer ignorant. And he says, yeah, all right, fuck it. Let's get on the boat and go. Let's make it happen. And I really, really do love that. And it is really just the heart of what makes these books work for me.
And it ends there.
Yep,
It
basically.
ends.
Well, Sam joins them and then it ends.
Yeah, and then it ends. While Legolas and Gimli and Merry and Pippin, the rest of the remaining members of the Fellowship are like, okay, do we split up? Do we go this way? Do we go that way? Frodo resolves it. Frodo takes the initiative. Sam follows on, and we expect there to be a big fight, but whatever, of course, what happens to Boromir happens in the next book.
Yes. My understanding is a lot of the original edition, not original edition, a lot of the original publication was included with a chapter from the Two Towers as a teaser. That was a common thing. So I do think that was possibly in Tolkien's head, considering these books were done when he sent them when they were published. Like Two Towers is already done, Return of the King is already done by the time Fellowship gets published. So I think that is also something that's at play here. He's like, yeah, well, if they really want to know, they'll read the next chapter. It's going to be right there. But I also think it comes down to just like Tolkien prioritizing, no, this is actually the important thing. It's not this huge battle against the Uruks. And look, I love that Fellowship of the Ring ends on this great Titanic struggle, this beautiful, beautiful scene. And then that scene does exist. That happens in Two Towers. This still happens,
Yeah.
But I love that the movie was conscious enough too to make the focus at the end still be Sam and Frodo, still have this
Yes.
beautiful moment between the two of them. This,
Yes.
yeah, you're going alone and I'm coming with you. And that's also why these movies work for me despite not being perfect clones of the books.
Right. Because as important as, again, as I said, there's a lot of sitting around and talking and chilling in Elf Kingdoms here. There's a lot of people catching each other up on the lore and figuring out exactly what the stakes are. And when we get such a moment again, when we have the Fellowship, hashing out among themselves, okay, where do we go next? It's decided not by consensus, but by Frodo finally just taking the initiative and doing it.
Yeah. And the others come to understand and they realize they have their own paths to walk. And it works so well. And the thing about, I guess, coming here to the end of this book, the thing about this book that works so well for me is like, and I see this all as one grand thing. Tolkien wanted to publish this as one volume, and it's hard not to read it as one volume, because the next thing immediately happens, of course. But just taking stock of it, looking back, I've got just, and we're going to get it to more in the future books because they are by examples that I would like to pull come really in future books. But I've got my real criticisms of Tolkien and some of the politics that come into play. But gosh, these moments of like humanity are so cool. And obviously I say humanity in quotes, it's a Hobbit, but sure, you know what I mean. This moment of humanity here works so well. And
Hobbitude.
Yeah, Hobbitude. It allows you to just sort of reflect on the whole thing, and you have a nostalgia for pages that you read 10 minutes ago. The whole thing rings with how much is underneath it. And despite how many pages are underneath it, you feel the tens of thousands of pages more that Tolkien has written that will never be seen by the light of day until after his death. And then his son will have to translate them without keys because Tolkien would make up languages and write in them and then not tell anyone how to read them, which is a conversation that plays into Lost Tales if we ever did those books. But you feel the weight of what is in this world, and then you have character step out through all of it. You have a moment of character that breaks the lore, that makes the lore, that sublimates the movements of machinations of kingdoms, right? that sublimates the magic. It's a moment of a guy making a decision that sublimates all that. And that is why, despite Lord of the Rings being the example that is cited by, your most like Reddit world build people out there, and for good reason, because it is a tightly built world, it transcends that too, because this is actually what Tolkien is most worried about at the end of the day. And everything else serves these moments of character.
100%.
Fuck, I love these books.
And I am glad that I have you to guide me through the more esoteric bits. And the again, you have it exactly right that he's building toward these specific moments where people ultimately make their decisions based on the weight of everything that came before. Because boy, is some of it quite weighty, But again, memes aside, if you're willing to shoulder a little bit of it, it's well worth the journey.
Yes, no doubt. I know we didn't get into a lot of Marxist analysis on this episode. Rest assured, just wait for Scouring the Shire. I have some political thoughts. Same with Isengard, actually. Two Towers and Return of the King, much more politically analyzable. This one, just a lot of vibes. There's just a lot of vibes. So if you want your Marxist thought of the day, think of this. Why did Gandalf and Karl Marx look so similar? Checkmate, liberals.
They've never been photographed together, notably.
Yeah, I mean, I'm me like proceeding to hide the commissioned art I have of Karl Marx and Gandalf kissing. I don't have that, but listeners, if you are enterprising, if you have courage, I know, we can bring things into existence, perhaps just by speaking them. That's one of the things that we learned through Tolkien.
Or by commissioning them from your favorite artsy friend.
That's true. An art fight is happening right now. Apparently, I don't know what that is, but my husband is all in about it. So
hell yeah,
art fight me a thing. I don't know. Someone's laughing at me right now, but it's okay. Lenore, what are your final thoughts? And by final thoughts, I mean not really, because we have 2 more books of this to go. But what are your thoughts walking away from the Fellowship of the Ring? Did the Ring get fellowshipped? Did they do the thing?
Well, I mean, here's the thing about shipping, right? As long as you can make a case for it, it'll exist, As long as you can struggle against all the forces of history, of divinity, of whatever force you care to name in the world, There is no force that can truly extinguish the power of survival, the desire to continue on and to bring the Shire, that battle cry into the chamber of Mazar Bul, into the darkest depths of the world. You can light up even the dankest, most remote area with a memory of home. And that's what I like about this book, Like, I not gonna lie, I do like where they dwell on the land, because it is maybe the most profound expression of love. Like, I mean, of course, we didn't mention the bit where Sam takes like Frodo's hand in Rivendell and then like kind of blushes and pulls it back. Like, there's no straight explanation for that, and it's very cute. But really, the most profound love that I've seen in these books is expressed for where you come from and where you live and what you were used to waking up and seeing every day. And I mean, the question is, how hard are you willing to fight for it?
Well, you've heard us talk about the Fellowship. In the next book, we'll see Sam and Frodo on a journey together, and we'll ask, will Tolkien ship fellows? See what I'm putting down there. And then Gollum, who's I suppose a third wheel in my analogy. Doesn't matter. Thank you everyone for listening to the Socialist Shelf. Peace out from Jacob.
Peace out from Lenore. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.